Welcome, the most captivating science fiction stories where mystery, action, and love intertwine are here. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The coffee dispenser wheezed like a dying Vargan beetle before sputtering lukewarm synthetic brew into Dr. Elias Thornfield's chipped ceramic mug. He stared at the brown liquid with the same disappointment he'd felt reading his latest funding rejection letter, which currently served as a coaster for his breakfast of reconstituted protein squares. Insufficient evidence of practical application, he muttered, mimicking Director Vance's nasal tone. 20 years of xenobiology research, and they want practical application. He took a sip and immediately regretted it. Even the coffee seemed to disapprove of his career choices. The holographic display above his cramped laboratory bench flickered to life, casting blue shadows across towers of specimen containers and half-assembled scanning equipment. The morning news cycle began with its usual mixture of corporate propaganda and interstellar sports scores. Elias was reaching to switch it off when an advertisement caught his attention. Surplus Asset Disposal Event. Today only at Warehouse District 7. Galactic Commerce Authority liquidating excess inventory from recent humanitarian operations. The announcer's voice carried the enthusiasm typically reserved for bargain hunting expeditions. All items must go, starting bids as low as 5 credits. Humanitarian operations. Elias snorted. The GCA's euphemisms grew more creative each quarter. Last month's population redistribution initiative had actually been mass deportations from the outer rim colonies. He wondered what surplus assets meant in their sanitized vocabulary. His curiosity piqued despite himself. Elias checked his credit balance. 47 credits, enough for basic necessities and maybe a small indulgence. He'd been planning to upgrade his spectral analyzer, but those plans had died along with his latest grant application. What harm could there be in observing another example of corporate doublespeak in action? The warehouse district sprawled across New Terra's industrial sector like a metallic fungus, each building more depressing than the last. Warehouse 7 stood out only for the unusual number of hovercars parked outside, and the distinct smell of unwashed bodies mixed with disinfectant that wafted through its loading dock doors. Inside, makeshift bleachers surrounded a raised platform where beings from across the galaxy stood in various states of dejection. The crowd buzzed with the predatory excitement of bargain hunters, their conversations a mixture of economic pragmatism and casual cruelty. "That Zephyrian looks strong enough for mining work," observed a woman to Elias' left, pointing at a tall, blue-skinned humanoid whose multiple arms were shackled together. "Though I heard they need constant humidity or their skin starts flaking." "Too high maintenance," her companion replied. "Better to stick with something simple. My cousin bought a Vorthan last month for cleaning work. They don't eat much and they're naturally germophobic." Elias felt his stomach turn. The assets being discussed were clearly sentient beings, not equipment to be evaluated for efficiency. He began to question his decision to attend when the auctioneer called for attention. "Next item, lot 47. The man's voice boomed through amplifiers. "One female, species designation Ethrani. Recent acquisition from the Kepler sector incident. Standard humanoid physiology with minor variations." 2 guards escorted a figure onto the platform, and Elias found himself leaning forward involuntarily. The woman appeared almost entirely human except for her ears, which extended upward in elegant points that reminded him of ancient Earth mythology. Industrial grime covered her clothes and skin, but beneath the dirt, he could see she possessed an almost luminous quality, as if her cells contained trace amounts of bioluminescent compounds. "Now, I'll be honest with you folks," the auctioneer continued with practiced charm. "This one's been classified as economically marginal. No documentation of useful skills, doesn't speak standard, and our behavioral assessment team noted some resistance issues during processing." The crowd's interest visibly waned. Several potential bidders turned their attention to refreshment vendors or began discussing other lots. Elias watched as the woman's eyes scanned the audience, and when her gaze briefly met his, he saw something that made his xenobiologist instincts tingle with recognition. Intelligence. Not just basic sapience, but the kind of analytical awareness he'd learned to identify in his research subjects. Let's start the bidding at, oh, what the hell, 5 credits. The auctioneer's tone suggested this was more comedy than commerce. Come on, folks, 5 credits, that's less than lunch. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, I wouldn't pay 5 credits for that kind of trouble. More laughter followed. Elias felt heat rising in his cheeks. The casual dehumanization struck him as particularly obscene when directed at someone who clearly possessed higher cognitive functions. His hand moved before his brain could intervene. Here. The word escaped louder than intended, causing heads to turn in his direction. The auctioneer looked genuinely surprised. Well, we have 5 credits. Any other bids? He paused dramatically, going once, going twice. Elias realized with growing horror that no one else intended to bid. This wasn't about acquiring labor. It was about disposing of an unwanted problem. The 5-credit minimum existed purely to satisfy legal requirements for asset transfer. Sold. 5 credits to the gentleman in the brown coat. The gavel fell with finality that seemed to echo in Elias' chest. As he made his way toward the payment station, his mind raced through the implications of his impulsive decision. Legal ownership of a sentient being, even under GCA commercial law, carried responsibilities he'd never considered. Housing requirements, subsistence provisions, behavioral management protocols, none of which he was remotely prepared to handle. The payment terminal beeped cheerfully as it deducted 5 credits from his account, reducing his total to 42. In exchange, he received a data pad containing ownership documentation, basic care instructions, and a legal disclaimer longer than some research papers he'd published. Congratulations on your purchase, the clerk said without looking up. Item pickup is through door 3. Next. Door 3 opened into a holding area that resembled a veterinary clinic, more than a humanitarian facility. The woman, his woman, according to the legal documents that still felt surreal, sat on a metal bench between 2 security guards. Up close, her distinctive ears seemed less mythological and more evolutionary adaptation. The pointed shape suggested enhanced auditory capabilities, possibly for detecting environmental changes or communication frequencies beyond human range. Lot 47, one guard asked, consulting his tablet. When Elias nodded, the guard unlocked the restraints around the woman's wrists. Standard advice. Establish dominance early but don't damage the merchandise. If you need behavior modification services, that's extra. The casual brutality in his tone made Elias want to punch something, preferably the guard's smug face. Instead, he managed a tight smile and extended his hand toward the woman. Hello, he said softly. I'm Elias. She studied his outstretched hand for several seconds before tentatively placing her palm against his. Her skin felt warm and slightly textured, like fine-grained leather. When she spoke, her voice carried a melodic quality that suggested her native language relied heavily on tonal variations. Kathara null vashti. The guards exchanged glances. Yeah, they do that sometimes, one explained. Gibberish mostly. Usually stops after a few weeks of proper conditioning. Elias bit back his response. The woman's vocalization patterns suggested complex grammatical structures, not gibberish. Her inflection on the final syllable implied either a question or a formal greeting, possibly both, depending on cultural context. Well, she's your problem now, the guard continued, consulting his tablet again. Standard reminders. Registration with local authorities within 72 hours. Compliance with municipal ordinances regarding non-citizen residents, and monthly welfare inspections until the integration period expires. Any questions? How long is the integration period? Elias asked. Depends on the species and individual progress. Could be anywhere from 6 months to permanent supervision. Have a nice day. The casual dismissal left Elias standing in the warehouse parking lot with his unexpected acquisition, watching hovercars stream past in the afternoon traffic. The woman beside him remained silent, occasionally glancing around with an expression that seemed more analytical than fearful. His apartment was a 15-minute transit ride away, which gave him time to contemplate exactly how he'd explain this situation to his neighbors, his landlord, and eventually his colleagues. Mrs. Pettigrew from Unit 4B had already complained twice about his late-night equipment calibrations. Adding an alien housemate to the mix would probably trigger a formal grievance with building management. The woman seemed fascinated by the transit pod's windows, pressing her face against the transparent aluminum to watch the city scroll past below. When they passed through a section where late afternoon sunlight caught the metallic spires of the government district, she made a sound that might have been appreciation or recognition. Beautiful, isn't it? Elias said, following her gaze. Those buildings are almost 200 years old, built during the first colonial expansion. She turned to look at him directly, and he noticed her eyes contained flecks of gold that seemed to shift in response to changing light levels. Another evolutionary adaptation, perhaps, enhanced visual acuity for low-light conditions. Cathara, she repeated, pointing at herself. Then she gestured toward him with a questioning expression. It took him a moment to realize she was trying to learn his name. Elias, he said, touching his chest. Elias. Elias. Her pronunciation was careful, methodical. She repeated it twice more, each time with slight variations in emphasis until she settled on a version that sounded almost natural. That's right. He pointed at her. Cathara. She shook her head and launched into what seemed like a correction, complete with gestures and facial expressions that suggested he'd gotten something fundamentally wrong. After several failed attempts at repetition, she appeared to give up and simply nodded when he said, Cathara, again. The transit pod announced their stop with mechanical cheerfulness, and they disembarked into the residential complex where Elias had lived for the past 8 years. The building's security scanner performed its routine identity verification as they passed through the lobby, noting the addition of an unregistered resident to Unit 7G. Temporary visitor, Elias told the system, hoping that classification would buy him time to figure out the proper paperwork. His apartment felt smaller with another person in it, especially someone who moved with the careful awareness of a trained observer. Cathara examined everything with scientific thoroughness. The lighting fixtures, the gravity regulation panel, the molecular food processor, occasionally making soft sounds that might have been comments or questions in her native language. When she discovered his laboratory equipment, her entire demeanor changed. She approached the spectral analyzer with obvious recognition, running her fingers along its housing while making excited sounds. Before Elias could stop her, she'd activated the device and began adjusting its calibration settings with alarming competence. Wait, he started, then paused as the analyzer's display showed optimization levels he'd never achieved despite months of fine-tuning. How did you? Cathara looked up at him with what he could only interpret as amusement, then gestured at the now perfectly calibrated machine, while saying something that definitely sounded like laughter. For the first time since the auction, Elias began to suspect that his impulsive 5-credit purchase might have been the bargain of a lifetime. Elias woke to the sound of his gravity generator humming in perfect harmony, something it had never done in the 3 years since he'd bought it second-hand. The usual grinding wheeze that accompanied its morning startup cycle had been replaced by a smooth, almost musical resonance that made his coffee mug vibrate pleasantly on the nightstand. He found Cathara in his laboratory, surrounded by tools he definitely didn't remember leaving out, with the gravity generator's maintenance panel open, and its internal components arranged in neat rows across his workbench. She looked up as he entered, her expression mixing pride with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd fixed something that had been bothering them all night. "Kethara null meshtivel," she announced, gesturing at the disassembled machine with obvious pleasure. "You fixed it." Elias approached cautiously, noting that she'd somehow acquired his tool kit without making any noise that might have woken him. "How did you even know it was broken?" She tilted her head and made a series of clicking sounds while pointing at her ears, then mimicked the generator's previous grinding noise with startling accuracy. Apparently, the machine's acoustic signature had been as irritating to her enhanced hearing as nails on a chalkboard. Right, enhanced auditory capabilities. He examined her work more closely and felt his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. The modifications she'd made went far beyond simple repair. She'd restructured the entire gravitational field matrix using principles that shouldn't exist outside theoretical physics journals. This is actually brilliant." Kethara beamed at his tone, even though she clearly didn't understand the words. She began reassembling the device with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed, occasionally pausing to make small adjustments that somehow improved upon her already impossible improvements. The door chime interrupted what was becoming a masterclass in advanced engineering. Elias glanced at the time display and groaned. 7:30 a.m. was too early for visitors unless something had gone seriously wrong. Dr. Thornfield. The voice belonged to Mrs. Pettigrew, his neighbor whose hobby seemed to be monitoring everyone else's business with scientific precision. "I need to speak with you about the unusual electromagnetic readings coming from your apartment." Elias caught Kethara's eye and held a finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. She nodded understanding, then did something that made her practically vanish into the laboratory's shadows despite standing in plain sight. "Just a moment, Mrs. Pettigrew." He activated the door's privacy screen and tried to look like someone who hadn't accidentally acquired an alien housemate yesterday. "What can I do for you?" "Mrs." Pettigrew stood in his doorway holding a handheld scanner that beeped irritably every few seconds. Her expression suggested she'd discovered evidence of a major conspiracy involving him, his apartment, and possibly the downfall of civilization as they knew it. "These readings have been off the charts since yesterday evening," she announced, consulting her device with the authority of someone who'd appointed herself building safety coordinator. "Electromagnetic fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, and something my scanner can't even identify. Are you conducting unauthorized experiments?" "Just some routine equipment maintenance," Elias replied, which was technically true if you considered impossible improvements to gravitational field generators routine. "Nothing dangerous. Routine maintenance doesn't generate exotic particle signatures," Mrs. Pettigrew countered, waving her scanner like evidence in a criminal trial. "I've lived next to scientists before, Dr. Thornfield. I know the difference between normal research and whatever this is." From behind him came a soft crash followed by what sounded like muffled cursing in an alien language. Mrs. Pettigrew's eyes sharpened with predatory interest. "What was that?" "My cat," Elias said weakly. "Very clumsy cat, knocks things over constantly." "You don't have a cat." "New cat, recent acquisition." Mrs. Pettigrew tried to peer around him into the apartment. "Since when do cats generate quantum field fluctuations?" Another crash echoed from the kitchen, this one accompanied by a sound that definitely wasn't feline. Through his peripheral vision, Elias caught a glimpse of Kethara attempting to use his molecular food processor, apparently unaware that inputting commands in her native language would confuse its voice recognition system. "Very exotic cat," he improvised desperately. "Genetically modified for research purposes." "I'm filing a complaint with building management," Mrs. Pettigrew declared, though she seemed more intrigued than genuinely annoyed. "And possibly the Department of Xenobiological Safety. Something unusual is happening in your apartment, Dr. Thornfield, and I intend to find out what." She marched away with the determined. 3 weeks had passed since what Elias privately called the 5-credit miracle, and his life had transformed in ways that made his former existence seem almost quaint. His funding had been restored with embarrassing enthusiasm. His research papers were being fast-tracked through peer review, and his apartment had become a showcase of impossibly efficient technology. All thanks to Kethara's casual genius with anything mechanical or electronic. The morning routine they'd established involved Elias attempting to cook breakfast while Kethara improved whatever appliance he was using. Today's victim was his molecular synthesizer, which she'd somehow convinced to produce actual scrambled eggs instead of the protein-flavored paste that passed for breakfast in most residential units. "How do you keep doing this?" Elias asked, watching her adjust settings that shouldn't have been adjustable on a consumer-grade device. "Machines think simple," Kethara replied, her English improving daily through what seemed like osmosis. "Like children, need patience, gentle speaking." She demonstrated by cooing softly at the synthesizer's control panel, which responded by producing eggs that actually looked fluffy. "You're talking to my kitchen equipment. All technology has spirit, voice. Machines want to work good, but humans build them too rigid." She patted the synthesizer affectionately. Now it remembers how to be proper egg machine. Elias had stopped questioning her methods after she'd fixed his shower by having what appeared to be a philosophical discussion with its water temperature controls. The fact that his morning routine no longer involved either scalding or freezing seemed more important than understanding exactly how she'd achieved this miracle. The door chime interrupted his contemplation of impossibly perfect eggs. Through the security display, he could see Mrs. Pettigrew standing in the hallway with 2 uniformed individuals who wore the distinctive silver badges of Galactic Commerce Authority inspectors. "Hide," Elias told Kethara, who was already moving toward the bedroom with practiced stealth. "Dr. Thornfield." The lead inspector's voice carried the mechanical politeness of bureaucratic authority. "Routine compliance inspection regarding your recent alien asset acquisition. We have reports of unusual electromagnetic activity from your residence." Elias opened the door with what he hoped was appropriate confusion. "I'm sorry, alien asset. I think there's been some mistake." Inspector Martinez, according to her badge, consulted her tablet with the expression of someone who'd heard every possible excuse. "GCA records show you purchased Lot 47 from the Warehouse 7 disposal event on stardate 2387. 45. One female Ithrani purchased for 5 credits. Oh, that." Elias managed what he hoped was an embarrassed chuckle. "That was just academic curiosity, research purposes, but she's not actually here anymore." "Not here." The second inspector, whose badge identified him as Singh, activated a handheld scanner that immediately began chirping with interest. "These readings suggest active alien biomarkers within the premises." "Ah." Elias felt sweat forming on his forehead. "That's probably residual traces. You know how alien biology can leave persistent signatures." Martinez and Singh exchanged glances that suggested they'd encountered creative interpretations of the truth before. "Dr. Thornfield, GCA regulations require all alien assets to remain under direct supervision during the integration period. If your acquisition has been relocated without proper documentation, that constitutes a significant violation." "She's not relocated," came Kethara's voice from behind him, causing Elias' heart to attempt escape through his throat. "She is here, being properly supervised." Both inspectors looked past Elias to where Kethara had emerged from the bedroom. Having somehow managed to clean herself up and change into clothes that made her look more like a graduate student than a refugee from an alien slave auction. "And you are?" Martinez asked, though her scanner was already providing biological data that answered the question. "Kethara Nulvesh," she replied with perfect composure. "Dr. Thornfield's research assistant. We are studying applications of She looked at Elias with slight desperation. Quantum biological interfaces, Elias supplied quickly. Very cutting-edge work. Interdisciplinary collaboration between species with different sensory capabilities. Sing's scanner beeped more insistently. The readings are definitely consistent with Ithrani physiology, but our records indicate this individual should be in remedial integration status, not serving as a research assistant. Integration has been accelerated, Cathara said carefully. Dr. Thornfield is excellent teacher, very patient with language difficulties and cultural adjustments. Is that so? Martinez made notes on her tablet. GCA protocol requires demonstration of basic integration markers. Can you provide examples of successful cultural adaptation? Cathara nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, I have learned many Earth customs. For example, she walked to the kitchen and returned with the perfect scrambled eggs. Traditional human breakfast preparation. Very important ritual for morning energy optimization. She handed Martinez a fork and waited expectantly. The inspector took a cautious bite, and her expression shifted from bureaucratic suspicion to genuine surprise. This is remarkable. Most integration subjects struggle with basic nutrition management for months. Cathara has exceptional aptitude for domestic technologies, Elias said, which was true if you considered revolutionary improvements to basic appliances domestic. What about language acquisition? Singh asked. Our protocols suggest Ithrani subjects typically require extended linguistic therapy. English is similar to ancient Ithrani, Cathara replied without missing a beat. Many root words share common, etymological foundations, makes learning process more efficient than standard projections. Elias tried not to stare at her in amazement. Either she'd become remarkably skilled at improvisation, or Ithrani education included training in xenolinguistics that made her more qualified than most university professors. Martinez consulted her tablet again. Dr. Thornfield, our records also show unusual energy readings from your residence. Are you conducting any experiments that might affect your research assistants, biological systems? Quite the opposite, Elias said truthfully. Cathara's presence has actually helped stabilize my equipment. Her species appears to have natural sensitivity to electromagnetic fields that's improved the calibration of my laboratory instruments. Singh's scanner chose that moment to emit a loud warble and display readings that made both inspectors frown at their devices. That's interesting, Singh muttered. I'm getting quantum field fluctuations that suggest your equipment is operating at efficiency levels that shouldn't be possible with standard residential power allocation. Cathara stepped forward helpfully. Ithrani nervous system naturally resonates with quantum frequencies. Passive harmonization effect improves nearby technology performance, very beneficial for research applications. Harmonization effect. Martinez looked skeptical. That's not mentioned in any GCA documentation on Ithrani capabilities. GCA knowledge of our people is. Cathara paused delicately. Incomplete. Many abilities were not displayed during processing due to stress factors associated with separation from homeworld. The euphemistic way she referenced her capture and enslavement hit Elias with unexpected emotional force. He found himself stepping slightly closer to her in what was probably an unconscious protective gesture. Well, Martinez said after consulting with Singh in hushed tones, your integration progress appears to exceed standard benchmarks. However, we'll need to conduct a more thorough evaluation of these equipment improvements. Some of these readings suggest modifications that might require additional licensing. Of course, Elias agreed, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. I'd be happy to provide detailed documentation of any improvements to my research setup. Singh activated what appeared to be a more sophisticated scanning device. Dr. Thornfield, I'm reading energy signatures that suggest your gravity generator has been modified using techniques that don't appear in any registered patent database. Cathara and Elias exchanged quick glances. Her modifications had been so elegant that he'd never considered they might be completely unprecedented in human technology. Ah, Elias said weakly. That's part of our ongoing research collaboration. Cathara's natural sensitivity to gravitational fields has provided insights into optimization techniques that we're still documenting. Optimization techniques. Martinez leaned forward with obvious interest. Dr. Thornfield, if your research has produced genuinely novel approaches to gravity manipulation, the military applications alone would make this a matter of significant interest to the Defense Department. Military applications. Cathara's voice carried a note of alarm that both inspectors noticed. Standard procedure, Singh assured her. Any technological advancement with potential defense implications gets flagged for review. Nothing to worry about if your research is purely academic. Elias watched Cathara's expression shift from alarm to something that looked suspiciously like calculation. He realized with growing concern that she was probably evaluating whether her technological contributions might be used for purposes she found objectionable. Perhaps, Cathara said slowly, we should prepare more complete documentation before involving additional government departments. Science moves slowly, requires careful verification. Agreed, Elias said quickly. We wouldn't want to present preliminary findings that might be misleading. Martinez made more notes. Very well. We'll schedule a follow-up inspection in 30 days to review your documentation. In the meantime, standard integration protocols remain in effect. Ms. Nulvash, you're required to maintain residence at this address and submit to monthly welfare checks. After the inspectors left, Elias and Cathara sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of their narrow escape from bureaucratic scrutiny. Military applications, Cathara said finally. This concerns me. Me too, Elias admitted. I never considered that your improvements might attract that kind of attention. She stood and walked to his laboratory, where her modifications hummed with quiet efficiency. My people created beautiful technology, harmony with natural forces, tools that enhanced life rather than destroying it. Her voice carried sadness that spoke of loss beyond simple homesickness. Then miners came, looking for resources beneath our cities. Their methods poisoned our world's quantum foundation, made it unstable. The Kepler sector incident, Elias said quietly. The reports claimed it was a natural disaster. Natural, Cathara laughed bitterly, like calling murder natural causes. When our planet's quantum field collapsed, most of my people died instantly. Those who survived were scattered, sold as curiosities or labor assets. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Elias didn't know what else to say. You saved me, she said simply. 5 credits for a life that GCA considered worthless. Now I help you, you help me, but I will not help create weapons. Then we won't, Elias promised. Whatever we do with your knowledge, it'll be for peaceful purposes only. Cathara smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes completely. Good. Now, shall we prepare documentation that makes your equipment improvements sound very boring and impractical for military use? Absolutely. Think you can help me write something sufficiently technical and confusing? Doctor. Elias, she said with mock seriousness, I am expert at making simple things sound impossibly complicated. Academic survival skill. Despite everything, the inspectors, the military interest, the growing complexity of their unusual partnership, Elias found himself laughing. Whatever happened next, at least he wouldn't face it alone. The morning started normally enough, with Cathara teaching his coffee maker to produce something that actually resembled coffee instead of caffeinated disappointment, when Elias' door scanner registered an approach pattern it had never encountered before. The visitor moved with a gait that suggested enhanced reflexes and carried electromagnetic signatures consistent with advanced biotechnology. Cathara, Elias called softly, but she was already moving toward the window with an expression he'd never seen before, hope mixed with terror. The door chime sounded, followed by a voice speaking rapid Ithrani that made Kethara gasp and press her hand to the wall for support. Kethara null vashti morden, sister heart, I have found you at last. She stood frozen for several seconds before walking slowly to the door panel. Her voice when she answered carried emotions that needed no translation. Kael'dan, Kael'dan null morti. It is me, little star. Open the door. Elias watched as Kethara activated the door controls with shaking hands. The man who entered could have been her brother in more than name. The same elegant pointed ears, the same luminous quality to his skin, but where Kethara had been marked by captivity and loss, this man carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been broken. The reunion involved a great deal of rapid Ithrani punctuated by what were obviously tears of relief from both siblings. Elias found himself relegated to observer status, which gave him time to notice that Kael carried himself like someone accustomed to command, and wore clothes that suggested access to resources far beyond what most refugees possessed. Eventually, Kethara remembered she had a host and switched to English. Elias, this is Kael'dan, my brother. Kael, this is Dr. Elias Thornfield, who... She paused, apparently struggling with how to explain their relationship. Who purchased you at auction for 5 credits, Kael said in perfect, unaccented English. His tone suggested someone stating facts rather than making accusations, but Elias felt defensive heat rising in his chest anyway. It wasn't like that, Elias said quickly. I mean, technically yes, but peace, Dr. Thornfield. Kael raised a hand that somehow managed to be both calming and commanding. I have been monitoring GCA communications for months, tracking survivors from the Kepler incident. When I discovered Kethara had been purchased rather than processed for labor assignment, I knew something unusual had occurred. You've been monitoring GCA communications? Elias asked. How? Kael smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from austere authority to something warmer. Let us say that rumors of Ithrani technical capabilities were not exaggerated. Your communication networks are accessible to those who understand quantum encryption principles. He leads resistance group, Kethara explained proudly. Saves our people from GCA processing centers, finds safe places for survivors. A resistance group. Elias felt the ground shifting beneath his assumptions about his quiet life. How many of you are there? More than the GCA suspects, fewer than we need. Kael walked to Elias' laboratory equipment, examining Kethara's modifications with obvious appreciation. My sister has been busy, I see. These improvements are elegant work, little star. Elias is good person, Kethara said firmly. He saved me, protected me, never treated me as property despite legal papers. We work together now, equal partnership. Kael studied Elias with eyes that seemed to catalog everything from his posture to his emotional state. Equal partnership. Yet GCA records show you still hold legal ownership documentation. That's just bureaucratic nonsense, Elias protested. I never considered Kethara property. The whole system is barbaric. Indeed it is. Kael's expression softened slightly. Which is why we work to free as many as possible from that system. I have come to offer Kethara a choice. The weight of those words settled over the apartment like a change in atmospheric pressure. Elias realized with sudden clarity that his comfortable routine with Kethara, their morning conversations, their collaborative work, their growing partnership, had always been built on the foundation of her having nowhere else to go. What kind of choice? Elias asked, though he suspected he already knew. We have established a colony beyond GCA jurisdiction, Kael explained. Hidden but sustainable. Ithrani survivors working together to rebuild something resembling home. Kethara could live freely among her own people, contribute her talents to projects that serve our species' future rather than human academic interests. Kethara had gone very quiet during this exchange, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, it was to ask her brother a question in Ithrani that provoked a lengthy response punctuated by gestures toward Elia's equipment and what sounded like technical explanations. "My brother tells me about colony projects," she translated eventually. "Quantum agriculture systems, harmonic energy networks, gravitic architecture that grows rather than being built." Her voice carried longing that made Elia's chest tighten with unexpected pain. "It sounds amazing," he said, and meant it. "You should go." Both siblings stared at him with obvious surprise. "I should go," Kethara repeated. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to be happy," Elia said, realizing as he spoke that this was absolutely true despite how much the prospect hurt. "You have a chance to be with your own people, to work on projects that matter to you personally." "I can't compete with that." "Compete?" Kale looked genuinely puzzled. "Dr. Thornfield, I did not come here to steal my sister away from a life she has chosen. I came to ensure she had actual choices." "What do you mean?" Kethara stepped forward, taking Elia's hands in hers. "Kale brings proposal. Colony needs liaison with human scientific community. Someone who understands both cultures, can facilitate cooperation without revealing location or sensitive information." "Partnership position," Kale continued. "Ithrani knowledge combined with human research